Well, hello everyone. My name is Tracy, otherwise known as Scrapper Girly. I posted a couple of photographs on Facebook and in Carolyn Doobie's A Colorful Place to Play group of some ornaments that I had done with a couple of different kinds of acrylic ink, and I got some very nice comments. Thank you for those of you that left comments for me, and a few of you asked me for a tutorial, so I'm going to go ahead and do my very first ever tutorial, so please bear with me if the lighting's a little funky or my transitions aren't super perfect. I'm just trying this out, but this was such a fun technique and super easy. I wanted to share it with you all. So let's take a moment and talk about what it is that you will need. So first of all, what are we making? So this is just a blank ornament that you can get at local craft store. I've just tied some clear-ish sparkly ribbon on the top and then a little bit of twine to hang it from our tree. But you could use anything you'd like to top it off. And I'll show you some close-ups of some of the ones that I've made with this. Okay, here is an example of what this ornament looks like. This was one of the two original blank forms that one of my coworkers brought in to work. And this one is plastic. You can kind of hear that. And this is what the first two that I did look like. So kind of straightforward. There's some empty space in there. You can see where the alcohol ink kind of got into that acrylic ink and made some clear spots, which is really cool. So here's one that I ended up picking up later. The craft store near me ran out of those plastic forms, so I ended up going back and all they had left were glass ones that were a little bit smaller. But honestly, I really like the glass better. I think the ink moved more easily inside and the nature of the glass just reflects all that pearly goodness really, really well. So I'll show you guys just another one or two examples of the kind of thing that you can do with this, but really you cannot go wrong. I think this one was honestly the hardest one for me to do. I wanted to do one, at least one, that was really, really simple. And so this only has two inks in it. One pearlescent ink, the gold, and then the quinacridone magenta Liquitex acrylic ink, the transparent. But I wanted to challenge myself by doing one that was super, super simple. So you can go as simple as you like or as complex as makes your little heart happy. This one is probably the most complex one that I did. And the reason for that is that I just kept going until I liked it. And that, I think, is the ultimate rule with this technique. If you get to a place where you're not happy, keep going. And the alcohol ink dissolves away the other inks really well. So I was at a friend's house the other night and I was showing a group of folks how to do this, and a couple of times different people got to a point where they ended up with just a solid color, and when you add in the alcohol ink it kind of dissolves and pushes out that other ink and you just keep going. So this has got probably 5 or 6 different colors in here and maybe about 6 or 7 different layers at least. I just kept going till I finally got to something that I liked. And some of the folks that night when we were getting together, I mean, they were just gorgeous. Super complex and rich and easy. You cannot go wrong. Use this on anything glass or plastic, anything that doesn't need to be food safe, and you'll be good to go. I was with some friends and they were talking about doing this with vases or jars or bowls. There's just all kinds of stuff you can do, so it's pretty cool. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is figure out, at least at this point, what colors I'm going to want to use. Now, this is really the only trick to keep in mind are your basic principles of color theory. If I've got these colors, they will all work really, really well together. And if they're wet, they're going to blend together because they are all adjacent colors, complementary colors on the color wheel. The minute I start to introduce something like a red or a pink into this mix, because those are on opposite sides of the color wheel, if they mix, they could turn muddy or brown. Now that could be something that you're going for, and in fact, I'm going to use a contrasting color with the alcohol ink, and that's really where the magic comes in. But just keep that in mind. If you're using opposite colors on the color wheel, like blue and orange, purple and yellow, red and green, those could mix together and get a little bit brown or muddy. If you're happy with that, no worries. Then be happy with it and do what makes your heart happy. So I'm going to start off with these 3 colors for now. And the first thing I'm going to do is pop the top off of my ornament. Just like so. These particular Daler-Rowney pearlescent inks, I just adore these. They're super, super vibrant. What I like to do is I like to store them with the ink squirted out. Sometimes they'll get clogged in there. So I'm just going to fill my dropper with ink. And what I like to do is just drop it into the neck. Not too much because you don't want a lot of ink here or it's going to take a long time to dry. And then I will just swirl it around. Now I have a tendency to do this in vertical stripes. Oops, you can't even see that. In vertical stripes, that's just easier for me to control, and I will let that swirl around until it gets to the end. And this is where the paper towels come into play. I will just tap this until I get most of that excess ink out. We don't want too much in there. It's going to take a really long time to dry. So now I've got something that's pretty simple and straightforward, and I will just keep doing that until I get to a point that makes me happy. So I'm going to continue around, let this drip in its own fashion until it gets to the bottom. By the way, when you're using these inks, the pieces that you end up with on the paper towel, don't throw those away. They're really beautiful. You can do all kinds of cool stuff with that if you want to cut them out or die cut them into other projects that you have. So, okay, I might set that color aside for now and move on to another one. Now, because I'm picking colors that are very close to each other on the color wheel, I'm not super worried about the fact that this hasn't dried yet. These colors are going to mix a little bit, and I'm totally okay with that. So I'm just going to go in here and add a little bit more into the open areas and let that swirl around. And you can kind of see how they're mixing a little bit in this area, which is really cool. You might get some bubbles in there, some air bubbles, and that's totally fine. You can just tap those out and you'll be good. And these pearlescent inks are just gorgeous. I know the camera and this angle is just not going to do it justice with how beautiful these end up being when you've got them in here. So now I can kind of take these around into a different angle, and I'll let that one sit upside down for a little bit, and I'll put that color away. And while that's dripping down, I'll go ahead and mix up some gold. Actually, I'm going to hold on to the gold for that, or for now that I think about it. So hopefully you can see there's quite a bit of ink that's coming out of that, and that's okay. I'm just going to let that sit and be happy and dry just a little bit, because I'm going to throw in a different color there in a second. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up another one, and it is super easy to do this in an assembly line. I think I did 6 of these in one night after work in like just an hour or two, because I had one going, letting that ink drip while I moved on to another one. It moved really fast. So I'm going to use some of this pinky color, pinky red color. If I can get the top off, there we go. And this one I'm going to put a little bit extra, maybe a nice big glob in there, and I'm really going to let this one move around. Now, I'm sure there are a million different ways that you can do this sort of technique. You could use just alcohol inks, and that would give you a stained glass effect, which would be beautiful as well. This is just something that that I tried, that I really liked, that I thought was super simple and super easy. And these pearlescent inks, again, are just, I hope that is in focus, but they're just really beautiful. So in this one, you'll notice I've got some empty space, and then I've got some filled in space. And I'm gonna let that one, as hard as it is for me to do, sit and dry. Or at least dry as much as possible. Now, something to keep in mind when you're working, if you get ink on the outside of these when it flops over on your workspace, not to worry, you can either leave it there if you like that, or it'll scrape right off. So that's why I do this on the inside as opposed to the outside of the ornament itself. So these little guys will fall over, but that's okay. Okay, let me see if I can get some extras out of this. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna throw in a little bit of an opposing color into this, just so you can see the difference in the inks. So I'm going to pick up this blue Liquitex. This is Phthalo Cyan Blue. It's actually Phthalo Blue Green shade. This is going to be fairly dark. And these are transparent. The pearlescents are a little bit more opaque. They're not super opaque. But here what I'm gonna do, I just want you guys to kind of see what the difference is in what that looks like. You'll notice that it's a lot darker and it's transparent. And so it just adds more texture into the look that you're going for. And then you'll see how it starts to make this really pretty marbled effect. Now I'm going in horizontal, or rather vertical stripes with this. You could go horizontally. If I wanted to go horizontally here, I could do that. And then it adds just additional texture. And because these colors are all close to each other on the color wheel, I'm not gonna worry about them mixing or getting muddy because they're just gonna blend really beautiful. I don't know if you can see that bit right there. It looks really cool. So this is one of those projects, if you have a need or desire to have a lot of control over your end result, you may not enjoy this project because you really can't control what you get. And you have some elements based on what colors you use and where you drip them in your ornament, but really that's the awesome part. You get things that you could not possibly plan for, and that's what makes it really, really fun, for me at least. So I am going to let these dry just for a couple of seconds. I'll do some extra tapping. The Liquitex inks take longer to dry than the pearlescent, so just keep that in mind. I don't know, can you guys see that? Look at how groovy that is. Now this is honestly gonna be your biggest challenge. Your biggest challenge is, do I stop here or do I keep going? And if you wanna stop here, that is totally awesome. And again, I have some where I stopped really early on because I thought they were really cool and I needed to challenge myself by stopping. In this one here, what I'm gonna do, I am going to add, let's see, I'm just zenning this right now. I'm gonna add some gold to this pinky red one here. And these can get a lot of air bubbles in them, so you just want to keep that in mind. And I'm going to drip this into some of my open spaces here. And kind of let that do its thing. If I can get that on camera. There we go. So this is just adding just a little bit of extra color in there. And you'll notice this one is pretty solid. I don't have that much negative space or blank space in this one, and that's okay because it means when I throw the alcohol ink in here, it's really gonna make a big pop. So let me let that one sit for a little bit. And we'll go back to our blue one here, which just looks so flippin' cool. I think honestly, I think I might want to let that one sit for a while. I don't know if I want to go anywhere with that one quite yet. But I do want to show you what it looks like with the alcohol ink in here. And I really like to add contrasting color because I think that's what really makes it pop. And this little guy does not want to stay sitting there while I'm moving forward. So you can see I've got a little bit of that ink on the outside, and that's fine. I'll wipe right off. So right now I've got this pinky color and this gold color, and you might say, okay, Tracy, well, the red alcohol ink would go really pretty in here, and that's true, and you'd get this nice sort of monochromatic thing. Or you could add the blue and we could get some purple, or you could go a little crazy town and add a little bit of green. So that's what I'm gonna do. And again, earlier when we talked about this could get a little bit brown and muddy. Yes, it can. That's why the longer you let your ink dry inside, the more likely it is that you're gonna get the effect that you want and they won't bleed quite as much. But what I'm gonna do is look for a solid piece here that is mostly the pearlescent ink, and I'm just gonna lightly drop one drop in there. Can you guys see what's happening? So what it did is it started to pull away a little bit where that ink was, and now you get this really groovy sort of dimension in there. And this green is pretty light, so it's a lot more yellow, which is okay. It's not gonna do too much to my color story in here. So I'm just gonna drip another one, and you can start to see what that does there. So this is what I mean about if you get in there and you get some ink in there and you're not really liking it, use the alcohol ink not only to create the color that you're looking for, but also to break that ink up. And then you'll be able to add additional layers. So I'm gonna add in some more green to break up some of this pink, and then we'll add in some other colors at the bottom. So the alcohol ink is gonna dry super quick, which is good. And I'll just let that kind of sit around and do its thing. And then maybe a little bit more on this side here. And it just broke that ink up inside. I have no idea what the chemical makeup of this stuff is. I'm sure someone out there will know, but it just comes together in this really beautiful way. So hopefully you guys can see that a little bit more, how it broke up all that color. You've got some see-through spots, and then all this grooviness that's happening down at the bottom. Okay, because I can't just stop there, I have a problem. I'm gonna go ahead and add some of this Liquitex Quinacridone Magenta. This is a beautiful color. It is transparent, and it is going to just really brighten up this piece. So that's one of the things you can do. If you notice in your color mixing, if you got a little bit muddy, you can add one of these Liquitex colors and it will really brighten it up. So I'm just gonna let it, I kind of put a bunch in there. I'm gonna let that find its way down. And I don't know if you can see what that did. It just added some brightness to it. So this is really the process I use. I add in the pearlescent inks, I let those swirl around, get them going, kind of get a good, that's almost my background layer, if you will. Then I add the alcohol inks to get a little bit of texture in there, if we want to use that language. And then I go back after the alcohol inks with another ink, either a translucent, like this magenta, or I can go in with another pearlescent to fill in some of those empty spots that the alcohol ink created. And you just keep going until you're happy. Even if you end up with a solid color ball, as I mentioned before, you can add some alcohol ink and it will completely brighten that up. And it's amazing what will happen. So even if I go back to this one that I did earlier, which I actually really love, I think what I'll do is add some gold to that while this magenta is kind of trickling down. I'm gonna go back in here and add some some gold to this and maybe swirl this around in an opposite sort of pattern there. And then that's just gonna pop out in between those other colors. So I'll add one more bit over here. And a lot of this just really depends. Do you like really pearlescent? Do you like really metallic? I've got some on here, I can scrape that off. Do you like it translucent so it looks more like glass? Whatever process and end result that you like, you can just keep going until you get to that state. So I'm gonna let that one sit for a minute and come back and finish this guy up here. And let's see what we ended up with. So we've got, this one we started out with that pink color, we added some green alcohol ink, we added some gold and some of that magenta acrylic ink, and we ended up with this really interesting and I think pretty cool end result. So I hope you guys enjoy this technique. I would love to see pictures of what you come up with. There really is no going wrong. Keep going until you're happy, and I'll post some pictures of the final result here at the end. Thanks for watching. All right, so here is one of these with the top back on, and you can kind of see how that came out. There is where that green alcohol ink created that depth inside of there, which is really cool. So you get this like really groovy effect. Hopefully that's focused. There we go. And then this is what our blue and gold and green one looked like. And again, I just tend to go in these vertical patterns, but you could go horizontally around and really get some groovy effects. Now check this out. How beautiful is this? That is the leftover ink that we've been tapping out. So don't throw this out. This is really cool. I will put this in my art journal and smear it around or let it dry and use that for die cut or anything like that. Super fun. I hope you enjoyed that. Happy holidays. Talk to you guys soon.